Hey, I thought I would send this video in to kind of be an addition to the post in the threads of how to use a metronome in the playing section of the Hangout. I'll skip the lick of the week in favor of maybe this video of metronome tip of the week or something, I don't know. But I thought what I'd do is do this companion video so that you could see and hear in real time on this video how to use the metronome effectively to help you identify not only that your playing is smooth and in time, but help you also identify what the durations of the notes are that you're playing. Now I'm going to deal with 4/4 in this video, and I have my metronome set for 70, let me see, yeah, 75, is that right? Let me make sure. Yeah, about 75 beats per minute. Mine's the old-timey wind-up metronome, which only does one thing: swing back and forth. Now, some of you guys have these fancy digital metronomes that have a flashing light. It will beep. And the most basic function of any metronome is to count beats one beat at a time. But you can also use the metronome to divide the beats up differently, like cut time. I won't get into that in this video, but we're going to use this video in the concept of common time, 4 beats per measure, where each beat gets a quarter note, and the durations are basically how long notes last, right? So a metronome is effective for not only letting you hear and feel that your rolls are in time and the ideas you're playing are in time, but that you can play the durations of notes that your mind tells you need to play, because there are mixed durations in banjo playing. Not all rolls are 8ths, and if you play in cut time, not all rolls are 16ths. Sometimes you have quarter notes, you have rests where you don't play that last a certain amount of time. So using a metronome not only helps you develop good timing habits, but it also lets you feel and sense how long notes should last by their duration. So I'm going to fire up the metronome at 75 beats a minute. Now, one of the most asked questions is, what does 75 BPM mean? 75 BPM means beats per minute. So if I'm letting this metronome count for me in common time, 4/4 time, each one of these clicks is going to represent one beat. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So if you were to check this metronome with a clock, time it with the second hand of a clock, or use a stopwatch, any kind of timepiece, you would see that this thing clicks 75 times in a minute, so each beat represents that swinging motion, 1 and 2 and you would hear 75 of them in a measure, in a minute at this setting. There would be 4 beats per measure as a unit, but you would count 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and next measure, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and measure, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now, since this is a wind-up type metronome, guess what? I have to wind it up. But now, how would we use this to identify durations and help you to hear what they sound like? Let's use the 4th string as the example, as I did in the thread that I posted. I'm going to play the 4th string open, and I'm going to let it represent one whole note. Now we know a whole note lasts for 4 beats, so it lasts a whole measure. Since each one of these clicks represents a beat, I need to let this ring for 4 of these clicks, 4 beats. Now I'm just going to pick one side to start. Ready? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. That was a whole note, a whole D note. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. 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 So that means basically that I'm just playing one note per measure, and each note lasts for 4 whole beats. Now what if I were to slice a whole note into 2 halves? I would have 2 half notes. Now, how long would a half note last? Well, if a whole note lasts 4 beats and I cut it into 2 pieces, guess what? Each piece lasts 2 beats, like Star Trek. So now I'm going to play 2 half notes as D's. Ready? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So you see the way I'm using it here? the metronome is helping me determine that I've chopped a whole note into 2 equal portions. Each portion lasts 2 beats. What about quarter notes? Well, if I divide those half notes, each half into half, I get 4 pieces. Each piece lasts 1 beat. So now I'm going to play that D string as quarter notes. Ready? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So if you see what's happening here, whenever you take notes in measures, if you try to put more notes in the same amount of space as you did a bigger note, you have to chop them up into smaller pieces, and each piece lasts a shorter and shorter amount of time. You have to compress them to be able to fit them in the same space. So a whole note occupies 4 beats, or 1 whole measure. You can fit 2 half notes in the same space as 1 whole note, and now you can fit 4 quarter notes in the same space as the other 2 durations. Now what about eighth notes? Now we're getting into banjo land. When we're talking about expressing notes in common time, then typically people like to see 8 notes in a measure because it's easier to see. It doesn't take as much ink to print. Everything looks nice, and it spreads the measures out on a piece of printed page. So now I'm going to try to play this 4-string open as eighth notes, which means now I need to play these twice as quickly as I did the quarter notes. So now instead of 1 note per click, I have to play 2 notes per click. Ready? That's kind of hard to do with your thumb on 1 string. Why not express that as a roll, an eighth note roll in common time? I'm going to pick 5, 3, 1 and let that be an eighth note roll. But remember, I have to put 2 notes of the roll on each click, because eighth notes last half a beat, right? So each one of these is a beat. So in order to get 2 per beat, I have to play 2 per click with the metronome. So here it is, 5, 3, 1. So there I've played 8 notes in the same measure, where originally I had that 1 big note, or those 2 half notes, or those 4 quarter notes. They're all divisions of the same thing. It's like division in school, in middle school math. So every time you try to put more notes in a measure, you have to chop them up into smaller pieces, and they have to, each note has to be a little quicker in order to compress them to get them to fit into that space. So you started out with a whole note. Let me fire this up. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Then you went to halves. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Then you divided that note up into quarters. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Then you had eighth notes. And we also expressed that as a 3-note roll. Ready? Now if I wanted to play 16th notes at this setting in common time, then I would have to play 4 notes per click. Which is a little bit harder to do, but every time you want to play notes, more notes in a measure, that means the duration or the time it takes to play each note gets squished together, it gets shortened. So everything is division of half. A whole note, 2 halves, 4 quarters, 8 eighth notes, 16 sixteenths, 30 seconds, 64ths, they go all the way up to 128ths. But in bluegrass land, folks like to see rolls typically displayed as 8ths, but they're really played as 16ths in cut time, which is something we'll discuss later. But thanks for watching the video, and I hope it proves helpful to you, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.